Dating, relationships, and intimacy can be confusing. This has always been the case, but it's easy to feel like things have changed in the era of dating apps and even AI. My guest on today's episode still believes that at the heart of it all, we are driven by something deeply human, the need for love and connection. My name is Dr. Robert Duff, and this is the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. Today on the show, I'm interviewing Dr. Justin Garcia. He's an evolutionary biologist, a sex researcher, and the executive director of the world-renowned Kinsey Institute. He also serves as a chief scientific officer to the Match Group, which is the company behind apps like Tinder and Hinge. Dr. Garcia has spent his career studying how love, sex, and relationships shape our lives. He has a brand new book out, and we got into some fascinating topics during our conversation. Here are some highlights.
As you learn more about the natural world, part of the understanding evolutionary process is sex and reproduction. But for me, it was just the sort of glory of it, how extraordinary it can be to be in the natural world and the diversity of species and their colorations and their songs and their dances. A new study that came out that said that relationship satisfaction was the same, whether in monogamous or non-monogamous folks. And I think what's so interesting about that is that you can go online and it's so easy to find these hot takes and you find all this stuff that people will say. And a lot of it's not particularly supported by the literature. We did a study where we looked at orgasm across sexual orientations. And we found for men, sexual orientation didn't really have that much of a difference. Categories were somewhat the same, looking at straight, gay, and bisexual. But in women, we found something interesting, that lesbian women had the highest orgasm rates, higher than straight women. First challenge is, remember, these are introducing sites. You want to then meet the person and let the human brain does what the human brain does. Mm-hmm. But that our challenge is there's so many options that we discount people so quickly. Just like you're searching for your match, people who are searching for you, that you would register as an option of someone they can connect with. And that means being curious, but also allowing other people to be curious about you, giving them opportunities to be curious about you.
So if that sounds good to you, stick around. It's a really good interview. I think we get into some fascinating stuff. If you would like to reach out to me for any reason, to ask a question, provide a topic suggestion or a guest suggestion, or if you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email at duffthepsych@gmail.com or head over to my website, duffthepsych.com. Use the contact form there. Please don't forget, it really, really helps me out if you like, subscribe wherever you watch or listen to the podcast. All right, enjoy the interview. All right, everyone. I'm super happy for today's guest. I have Dr. Justin Garcia. He is an evolutionary biologist and the author of the new book, The Intimate Animal. We're going to talk about all sorts of things, intimacy, sex, all sorts of stuff like that. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Can I call you Justin today?
Yes, of course. You can call me Justin every day.
Awesome. So I guess a good starting place for this conversation is, where did your interest in, or I guess your awareness of intimacy and sex, like where did that sort of start? Did you have a very sex positive household? Is this something that started from a young age? Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. I often think of starting with my graduate school training, but I think it's good, right? Like, who's the whole self? How do we get here? So I actually, it's funny because I have a very close relationship with my parents, and I will joke sometimes with my mom now, where we just published a paper, for instance, on sex education, and with some of my colleagues, and I think about my own training, like what did I learn in the household? And we laugh about it because I was always interested in nature shows and nature documentaries. So in some ways, I don't remember having one sit down birds and bees conversation, where I think a lot of people remember these sort of uncomfortable moments or a particular class. Because I was liked all these nature shows, I sort of had pretty early on an understanding of mating behavior or reproduction. We did have a house that was always pretty open. We talked about anything, including health, sexual health. When I went to college, like drinking behavior and binge drinking and how to avoid it. And so I was lucky. We always had pretty honest, frank conversations at our dinner table. But I was really getting it from all these shows. I mean, I knew about, birds, sex differences in birds, and why the males are sometimes brightly colored and the females not brightly colored. So in some ways, it's interesting that my professional career took a similar path to thinking about mating and sex and intimacy. I think I was thinking about it as a younger than most, but in a what felt like in a context that I think seems more acceptable to folks sometimes.
Sure.
Although if you watch these nature shows, some of them are pretty graphic.
Yeah. It reminds me of that. I don't know if you remember that you and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals. So let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel.
I can remember the music video.
Yeah. I'm blanking on the band's name, but yes. Okay. And like, what was the model of like relationships for you growing up? Like, did your parents get along? Did you have kind of a traditional family structure?
No, I was raised by a single mom, until I was in my early teens, and my stepfather, who I just refer to as my dad now. And it's funny, not everyone knows, although sometimes they'll look at my parents and say, they both have such blonde hair. And I used to have brown hair. Now I have no hair, but it's my mom and my stepdad. But so early on, it was my mom and I, and she was great. She was a great single mom. Wasn't always easy, as is the case with single parents. And we had a relatively small family, and some kind of close family friends. And then my stepfather came in the picture about mid-teens, early teens, really. And I was lucky. I remember one of my closest friends at the time, he was also raised by a single mom, and his mom started dating someone before mine, and he couldn't stand who ultimately became his stepfather. And I think even all these decades later, still can't really stand him. And I was fortunate. I loved my stepdad. We hit it off right away. And he really worked on cultivating a relationship with me as well as one with my mom. So we did a lot of things together. Like we used to go fishing, and so it was all not traditional in that sense, but I had a really fortunate, really loving. I would say my youth was always loving, even when things were stressful. So.
Great. And so you by trade are evolutionary biologist. Was the seed planted back then, and it's been kind of the path to biology ever since, or did you kind of go through some different phases?
Yeah. In some ways, the seed was planted. I was interested in this sort of nature. And I think on hindsight now, I look back and there were things that when I was a kid, like I remember once my stepfather, there were, in our neighborhood, there were parakeets that were loose. They were like wild parakeets. There were two of them, and we laugh about it now. He's like, do you remember that you wanted to try and figure out if we could like create a net and catch them? And I was like, I think they were a pair, so we had to get both of them. So the seed was planted. I think I just had always an interest in the natural world, and partly as you learn more about the natural world, part of the understanding evolutionary process is sex and reproduction. But for me, it was just the sort of glory of it, how extraordinary it can be to be in the natural world, and the diversity of species and their colorations and their songs and their dances. So that had me interest early on, but my first graduate degree was in anthropology. So I was in biological anthropology. So I was thinking about biology and behavior, but that was my first, graduate program. And then after my master's, I did my PhD in evolutionary biology. And, so I was starting to think, but I was in the behavior track. So I was thinking a lot about how biology and evolution shaped our behavior in different contexts. But I wasn't really I wasn't in a sexuality program or a relationship program. So I was really taking a view of it in terms of evolutionary process and reproduction.
So the evolutionary side and the biology side kind of led you down to where you've more specialized now.
Yeah. And I actually first came to the Kinsey Institute as a postdoc. I was the then director, Julia Hyman's, who was a clinical psychologist. I was her postdoc. And I remember getting on the plane to come interview for it. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I'm like in over my head. I'm going to this mecca of sex research. And I wasn't really in the field. Like I was publishing on issues about sexual behavior, but from a different lens. So I hadn't gone to the sexology conferences. I hadn't published in the Journal of Sex Research. I just was in different circles thinking about, which today I appreciate as one of the interesting things about studying sex and relationships is that there are people doing it in a lot of different fields. Right. It really truly is an interdiscipline in that sense. But I felt like I was totally in over my head when I first got to the Institute. So But what ended up happening and what was so exciting is I was thinking a lot more about mechanisms. So I had done some work on sexual behavior and a suite of dopamine genes and how it was associated with different types of sexual risk-taking behaviors or sensation seeking. So I kind of had a different lens on how I was approaching it, and a different theoretical framework. The thing about evolutionary theory is it gives you a lens with which to think about the whole natural world and how behaviors evolve, how they maintain themselves, how they extinguish themselves. So I was thinking about different things, and that ultimately turned into a lot of fun when you could be in a place where you had all these different disciplinary specialties. So my
resources
career really,
too, right?
Yeah, and had resources to do it. And but my career in that sense wasn't a traditional path, because one of the things that happens in a biology department is once you study humans, there's a sense of like, well, you've become undisciplined. Like, go to anthropology or psychology now. So I've always been between departments and disciplines for my professional career, of like, where do I actually fit with the kind of questions I want to ask? And sometimes we did genetic studies, sometimes hormones, brain scans, interviews, surveys. I've been pretty open about using different kind of methods to kind of get at those questions that we want answers to.
Yeah. What I have kind of like a loose guide for my questions. I always do. Yeah. And one of the ones at the top here was, before getting into the kind of more modern human element, to ask you to just sort of nerd out a little bit about, some insights you have given all of your studies. Like, do you have a favorite study of your own?
Oh gosh, do I have a favorite study? Oh, there's so many. I don't know. I have a few that kind of boil to the top that for very different reasons, that I like. I mean, I did one with my colleague Dave Frederick on what keeps passion alive in couples and people who are in long-term relationships. I think the sample, we had about 50,000 people. We separated the papers on heterosexual relationships, gay men and lesbian women. And I like that because there was so much data, and we kind of honed in on a series of items that included everything from particular behaviors like kissing and oral sex to communication, interpersonal things. And then there were a suite of things we found for what kept passion high in long-term couples. And it was about intentionality. So it was like lighting candles, mood setting, reading magazines. It wasn't the smell of the candle. It was really just the idea that that I'm really focusing on us. I'm focusing on this dynamic, on setting the mood for each other and for ourselves. So I like that one. I do a very big study for 15 years now with my colleague, the late anthropologist Helen Fisher, and my other colleague, Amanda Gesselman, who's a social psychologist and one of my closest collaborators, called Singles in America. It's funded by Match Group. Match.com, the dating company. And we've been looking every year at a sample of about 5,000 singles, a new sample each year of their attitudes and behaviors. So that's a huge study. I mean, we've published quite a lot from it. We've learned an enormous amount. It's the most comprehensive study of singles in North America, probably in the world. And so that's been a lot of fun. And there's a lot of insights we've had from there.
Can I ask, with that study, is that just exclusively through the Match Group, or is that tied in with the university or the Kinsey Institute or anything like that?
I love that you asked that, because it's a really interesting example of how, when you study sex and relationships, one of the challenges is, how do you get it funded? How do you do, increasingly we're told, don't put sex in the title if it's a federal grant, don't put it in the abstract. There's this concern about the sort of political interference in studying anything about sex and sexuality, even if it's not ideological. I mean, almost none of my work is ideological in its framework. And that is a real challenge. And so we've been really fortunate to have industry partners. So the Singles in America study has been completely funded by Match, but we pay for a third-party data collection firm. So they're not users of a particular dating app or website, and they don't control what we learn from and what we publish on. So sometimes when you have industry funding, there's all these levels of approval. If you publish papers, very early on, we said, if we're going to do this, let's do it as a real study that doesn't have all these strings attached, that the scientific community can have faith behind, like, oh, this is a real study. So it's been a fantastic collaboration.
That's really cool. Cause like in, research, you can have academic research, through an IRB and all of these sort of channels there that are very regulated. And then there's, say a product that says, oh, we did independent research about this. And you kind of know it's very skewed in BS, but you have one foot in each world. So you're bringing kind of more rigorous academia influence to this study from Match. So like you can stand behind it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's helpful for them because they can understand who are singles, who are their client base. What do we know about attitudes and behavior and culture and spending and singles? And we have this big study. We've hired postdocs that some work exclusively on the Singles in America study. Really, it's just so much data. But you're exactly right. It's different from an industry, like a fee-for-service study where you would say, like, we don't really work on the apps. We don't work on the product side. It's really this separate commitment to understanding who are singles. And we've done a few things like that over the years. And they're really valuable studies. And you can often get funding to ask questions that you couldn't otherwise.
Like what?
So we've done, because the sample is so big and because we have this sort of free reign to publish, another study that I loved, we did on, we published a few papers on orgasm because we ask about sexual behavior and orgasm. But we have these huge data sets. So sometimes colleagues are like, how did you have like this orgasm data on, 35,000 people?
We're not supposed to talk about that. How did you get that many people?
And one that I really enjoyed, we did quite a few years ago now. We looked at orgasm and sexual orientation. And the reason is that in Masters and Johnson in 1966, they came after Alfred Kinsey's work. And they wrote in one of their books that straight men could learn a lot from lesbian women in terms of pleasure and pleasuring partners.
Sure.
And I thought it was a curious aside, probably not wrong, but I was like, well, actually, what are some of the difference here? It was just sort of this seed that they dropped of this question. So we did a study where we looked at orgasm across sexual orientations, and we found for men, sexual orientation didn't really have that much of a difference. Categories were somewhat the same, looking at straight, gay, and bisexual. But in women, we found something interesting, that lesbian women had the highest orgasm rates, higher than straight women. But what's interesting about that is we predicted that it would have been bisexual women because in studies on arousal, they tend to have the sort of the most arousable responses, bisexual women. So they are turned on by more items on average. So, but the fact that the orgasm outcomes were higher, that was interesting because I think it says something about partners. One of my colleagues said, well, so is the takeaway that men are bad for women's orgasm, and they just keep dampening it down. But I think it does say a lot about gender roles and how we think about pleasure and the pursuit of pleasure. And a lot of what we saw for lesbian women were things like more oral sex, more communication, more foreplay before penetrative behaviors, if there are any penetrative behaviors. So those are conditions.
Integration of toys, assistive things.
Exactly. Yeah. Toys, a lot more foreplay, more attention to genitals. So it's interesting because you can have these kind of theoretical questions or something that was published a half century ago. And then we've got this enormous data set that we can just go like, let's go. I think we can test this. We could test this question in it. So that's been fun. And often things that you wouldn't think, you could test in that, that kind of data set.
I was going to ask, is there anything that you found in the research that seems to conflict with your, what you understood about the world or what you understood about the way humans interact in intimacy or sexual domains? It just doesn't seem like that should be true, but maybe it is.
Yeah. If I can talk about a totally different study, it happened to me. It's happened throughout my career, but there was one that I remember just getting I felt like I was hit in the face with reality. Maybe I should have said this is one of my favorite studies. So we did a study years ago in Las Vegas in a sex club in Las Vegas. And we were collecting hormone samples. So people would come in, we would do an intake interview, and then we would get a sample of saliva and we put it in a little cooler. So we were in the corner of this lounge in this club with our ice cooler. And
that's really hilarious. Just thinking about that image.
It was the wildest.
And when you say sex club, do you mean it's like a play party? People are interacting in that way?
Yeah, it was a I'm trying to remember. I think it was an 18,000 square foot facility, 2 stories. There's different rooms, there's showers, there's a theme. So it's really a kind of a club that men could go, women could go, or couples could go. And and there was a section that was just for couples. And so some people went because they would just engage in sexual activity with their partner. And they wanted to be in this sort of erotic space. They wanted maybe people to watch them. They wanted to watch other people, but they weren't really interested in interacting with others. Some people just went to walk around to be sort of shocked and maybe others would be turned on if they're more voyeurs. And then there were people who were swingers and they were swapping partners. So a lot of different things happening in this space, and kind of rituals about letting people know, like, is it okay can I touch you? Are you interested? And so we were there, though. We were collecting data. We were fully clothed in the lounge and collecting hormone samples and interviews. And then when people left, they would do an outtake interview and we'd say, tell us exactly what happened. What'd you experience? Give me another saliva sample. And I remember interviewing this one couple who were swingers. And I think I didn't realize at the time I had a bias towards those people who are engaging in open relationships or non-monogamy, that there was maybe something going on in the relationship, that there was something that they were trying, they were just trying to figure out a way to stick together, but they weren't really satisfied with each other. Or there was some kind of deficit in the relationship. And I guess I hadn't really acknowledged it as a bias, but in my head, I was seeing that in some early studies and just imagining that was the case. And I remember interviewing this couple after taking their saliva, and they were so in love with each other. And they kind of finished each other's sentences. And they talked me through when they opened their relationship. They hadn't for years. The woman had a sort of medical problem, a hormonal challenge, and they were struggling in their sex life. And then they decided to open it up, and they had new medical help, and she was on hormone replacement, and how this worked for them, and how they were really derived pleasure from seeing each other have this expanded sort of sexual experience and the sexual novelty. And it was a wake-up call for me, really interviewing this couple that, maybe one could argue I should have known it sooner, but for me, it was this moment of just saying, wow, this is so atypical as a relationship and structure and sexual life. Not problematic in that sense, just not the most common that we see
in humans.
But they were they were just so in love. And I think it was, from then we've done studies on negotiated non-monogamy, polyamory, and that continues to expand to my view. And we're learning so much about how people negotiate having multiple partners, how people negotiate the different structures of relationship and somewhat different challenges in their relationships. But that for me was such a turning moment of just seeing another side of people and how people structure intimacy in unique ways.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me. I mean, my personal background is I'm in a non-monogamous relationship, so I've been married for a long time. I've been with my wife since I was 15 years old. And I've been with my girlfriend, long-term girlfriend, for almost 4 years. So, that's an interesting area of inquiry and stuff like that. And the thing that I think about is just it's so hard to capture in research on large scales because there's so many different subsets of that. There are definitely ways to do non-monogamy very wrong, and then when there's not one perfect way to do it. But when you are doing it in a way that is, more right, it's hard to imagine it not being a good relationship because what is required, right? In terms of you want to learn how to communicate openly. You want to learn how to, be a good communicator. Try this out because you really, really, really have to.
You get forced. I mean, you get pushed to. You have to. It's communicate.
Right. Otherwise, it's toxic, basically.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's and you'll know this better than I do. I think often people will think that open relationships, that it's just like a sex party all the time, and it's much more. It's a communication party all the time.
Right, and there's a joke in kind of the non-monogamy community that polyamorous people are actually just people with a calendar kink, like a Google Calendar kink, because basically it's just a lot of scheduling and and finding ways to negotiate that. I think there's just a study out recently by Joel Anderson as the lead author on it, and looking at relationship satisfaction and monogamous and non-monogamous
relationships, and we can use different terms, as you know. Some people like the term consensually non-monogamous. That's the term that's in the academic literature. Increasingly, some folks have really argued, well, that's a loaded term. Who's really consenting? Are both partners always truly consenting? It's also why some researchers don't like the term ethical non-monogamy. Who's ethics?
Sure.
So now some people like negotiated non-monogamy.
Yeah, for sure.
Academics doing our thing, you know.
Yeah.
Can't agree on terms. And I think my takeaway from this new study and from a lot of studies is we could have a natural history that says we form intense bonds with people. But that doesn't mean that people aren't able to structure that in a lot of different ways in the way that they structure their romantic and sexual lives. Different relationships have different challenges. If you're in a sexually monogamous relationship, you might struggle with boredom and jealousy. But if you're in a negotiated non-monogamous relationship, you can also struggle with boredom and jealousy, and it's just different ways. So I think, for me, sometimes I think folks think because I study the evolution of monogamy that I'm overly committed to a particular, what people should do. And I'm not really in the business of what people should do. I'm more interested in understanding the different pressures. The reality is people can and do structure their relationships in lots of diverse ways. As an evolutionist, we're in the business of studying variation and diversity of trait.
Yeah.
I would expect people to structure their relationships differently, and understanding how they negotiate the different challenges with different structure.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, there's like the biological evolution side of like across generations and stuff like that. And then there's just the immediate pressures of on the more micro scale, right? Things like the economy or where you live and child rearing and, whatever, things like that. It's fascinating. You're in a very interesting line of work.
Yeah, it keeps things interesting and exciting, because exactly we could look on a scale of, it seems like we see more non-monogamy in some big cities in the US than other places. What are the cultural and social factors? But then also when we look cross-culturally, places where certain societies might practice different relationship structures, and cases where maybe men practice polygyny and how is it structured by age, and or those rare cases where I say rare because they're not as common, where women practice polyandry, where women have two husbands or more. So there's a lot of diversity in the world in terms of our relationships. At its core, what I'm interested in is that when you look at all of that variation, there's a theme that emerges throughout. And that's that people are interested in long-term relationships, and they seem motivated for these long-term bonds. And a whole lot of our sexual lives occur in the context of those long-term bonds. Some people are able to have more than one at a time, as you're sharing. But whether you have one or two or three, we still know that there's this long-term intimacy, this commitment to intimacy, this closeness that a lot of our sexual lives are couched in. And that seems to be a familiar pattern. Doesn't mean people are not also having casual or uncommitted sex, but that we're motivated for this combination of closeness and sexual activity, particularly sexual novelty. And that intoxicating mix is what I'm interested in.
Does this get into your book? Is this sort of the genesis of your book? Okay. Well, talk about that a bit then. So where did the, spark for this book come from?
Yeah. So my new book, The Intimate Animal. What I was interested in there, actually, the first spark was funny if we go back to graduate school. So one of my first sparks for that was early on in my work, I noticed I was interested in monogamy, the evolution of monogamy. And for our species, we see that our ancestors first evolved the tendency to form these, what we call pair bonds, these love relationships about 4.4 million years ago. And that's important because we sometimes take for granted that we even have the capacity to form love relationships in these pair bonds. Only about 3% of mammals engage in what we call social monogamy, pair bonding, 15% of primates. So that we have the architecture in our brain to even do it, to have what we do see in social animals is what's called preferential sociality. You don't lick and groom just anyone. You don't hang out with just anyone. And then you certainly don't mate with just anyone. But that we then, through all that choice process, then we kind of stick to someone for some period of time, sometimes lifelong. It's really interesting. So I was interested in that phenomena. But something biologists do that's so different in their framing compared to psychologists and sometimes anthropologists and how we talk about monogamy in the public is that they differentiate. We differentiate two different aspects of monogamy. And this is really one of the core themes of my book and The Intimate Animal is there's social monogamy, which is the pair bond relationship. And then there's sexual monogamy, which is fidelity. And that when we see them as somewhat different lenses, we also can see that there's different parts of the brain that are involved in regulating these. This desire for closeness is the pair bond. Pair bonds for biologists are mutual territory defense, mutual nest building, mutual raising of offspring, a lot of mutual in there. So this idea that you have a co-pilot. And that's different from sexual exclusivity and fidelity. And not only are they different parts of the brain, there's different selection pressures that we have selection that having a partner to weather life with. I've argued that a lot of pair bonding evolution is about weathering uncertainty with another person. That's different from sexual novelty because although we want one person, or in some cases multiple people, but you have a partner to weather uncertainty with, that's different from also wanting sexual novelty. So we're also interested in excitement and novelty in our sexual lives. And those can be in conflict. When they're not in conflict, we could feel great. But when they are, oof.
Yeah. I mean, in modern society, I would say they are probably often in conflict, right? You know, I work with a lot of older people in my job. My day job is a neuropsychologist. So I work with a lot of people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And so I see a lot of that model of the 50s era relationship where, you know, you're in it together, but you kind of, you know, you stopped having sex 30 years ago. You kind of hate each other, kind of love each other. You know, that desire for sexual novelty is not fulfilled. The bond of mutuality is, and you just sort of ride that out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think how people find ways to negotiate that and navigate it. And I think when I think of relationships, I often think of a lot of researchers use these sort of triangle theories or triarchic theories, and from psychologists, anthropologists, sociologists. And we can think that there's sort of these three parts in our romantic and sexual lives. And one is the friendship component, the attachment component, the bonding. The other is the attraction and the sort of desire for someone. And then there's the sort of sex and libido and lust component, depending on what terms you want to use. Each have their own nuances.
Sure.
And so for me, what's interesting is when we look at people's relationships over the long haul, especially if you decide to be in a relationship with someone for a long time, how you navigate those different pieces. And there's waxing and waning in all of them. And sometimes one just goes away. But at its core, if you keep the friendship and the emotional closeness, but then, you know, sex extinguishes, that can be a real problem for couples. In fact, we know it's one of the biggest predictors of divorce is sexual problems in couples. But the other, it can happen in any combination. You can have a fiery sexual relationship, but you stop trusting the person, or you stop really having a core friendship with the person. So what I've argued is that I think we're really motivated for finding relationships that we can have all of that. And even if we try to break it up, now some people will try things like, well, my primary relationship I have a really close partnership with, so then I've offset sexual interest. Well, with other partners, that in my experience and from research we've done, that can work sometimes if there's a problem you're trying to solve often. So if you say, okay, I have a primary relationship, but we have no sex, but it's because that I have an injury, or I'm just not interested anymore, or you know, you're trying to navigate something like
my partner's asexual.
My partner's asexual, exactly. And then that can work really well for people because you find a way to structure and say, well, there's this piece that I don't get in one relationship. The challenge can be, I think, if you have a relationship and you just say, I'm not attracted to you anymore, but I still care about you. That's harder to navigate because you're not saying, what's our shared problem? Like, oh, we have this, you know, you have an injury. That's our shared problem. We're working around it. It's just, no, the shared problem is you're not interested in me anymore in this way. That is harder for people to wrap their head around and try to solve. And they do sometimes, particularly when families are involved and kids and households and economics. But so what I've really been trying to think about in different ways is how the tensions between that kind of love and sex, social and sexual monogamy, how that plays out when we're single, when we're maintaining a relationship, when we're breaking up, when we're finding love again. This has been my most recent crusade is really understanding how those tensions play out in different ways for different folks.
Yeah. What is the intention of the book to help people with something? Like, do you want people to get something out of this that they can use in their life?
Yeah, a couple of different things. And maybe one is my sort of grand goal with this is, so I'm a research scientist. I'm at the Kinsey Institute. When I sat down and wrote The Intimate Animal, what I wanted to do is say, how do we infuse more science into how all of us think about our romantic and sexual lives? And so many people struggle with different aspects of love and sex. You know this better than I do. You see this more, right? Every day. And people struggle with, am I doing it right? How should I do things differently? How do I optimize my intimate life? And what I really want to do is when we look at all of this research and all of the evidence we've collected, and what's really unique for me as the director of the Kinsey Institute, I have this unique position that people will often come and share stories with me, and they'll say, oh, this happened in my marriage, this happened in my relationship. And because I think they often feel that we're a safe repository, which we are. That's what we've done for 80 years. And it's a great honor, actually, when people share stories with me. Someone asked me recently, like, do you get tired of it? And I said, no, I'm honored when someone shares a story with me. It's a privilege to know, to be a part of someone's life and their stories. But when I look at all of them, I often think, oh gosh, we don't have enough information out. We just don't have enough kind of cutting through the noise. So my big goal in writing this book was, how do I help people cut through some of the noise? By saying that there is a science we do know a lot about sex and relationships and their interplay. And you're not alone in those challenges. There's lots of challenges that people have. You're not alone in them. But there's also a lot of opportunity. And the more we understand how we tick, I think even this idea of understanding, I could love someone, but I could have interest in someone else, and then how to navigate that. You don't have to feel shameful or hate yourself or think that your relationship is falling apart.
Yeah. I would say you can love somebody and you're going to desire other people, no matter what. Yeah. And exactly. To pretend like that's not the case is, a recipe for gaslighting yourself or somebody else.
Exactly. I totally agree with you. But when we understand that, we understand where that comes from, that it doesn't come from what was used to be called the deficit model of relationships, that, I'm not getting enough in my primary relationship. You can address it differently. You can explore it differently. So my goal is the more we understand the science, the more we can spend in the sort of happy and satisfying moments in our relationships and less in the sort of challenging and unsatisfied moments where we're kind of double, triple questioning ourselves.
Yeah.
That was one of my big goals with the project.
You talked earlier about it being amazing how we have the capacity to form these bonds where not all mammals do, and talking about the difference between, loving somebody and having desire for them and or other people. I often talk to people about how, because we are human, we have these giant frontal lobes, right? We have the capability to, feel something and decide to do or not do something about it. Yeah. That's a big part of just because you had this thought about somebody else or you noticed somebody else, you can choose not to do something because we have this big old organ here.
Yeah, exactly. We're not prisoners of our biology. In fact, our biology gives us the tools to navigate and make decisions. When we did studies years ago on infidelity, we still do studies on infidelity, but ones that we did on these genes, DRD4 and DRD2, that were associated with infidelity.
Oh, those the dopamine ones?
Yeah, the dopamine gene.
Okay, and so reward system, stuff like that.
Yeah, so the dopamine reward system and these genes were associated with how, not how you produce dopamine, but how you receive it in the brain. So they were genes that code for the sort of how the neurotransmitters are getting processed, and receptors. And what we found is that a particular variant of the gene that was associated with sensation seeking, the longer alleles, these people are engaged in more alcohol use and abuse, more risk-taking behaviors, more gambling, also engaged in infidelity more often. And when they did it about 50% more often. And so I remember at the time in the news, it was called the cheating gene. I thought, oh my gosh, my career is over.
The friggin' headlines.
Yeah, exactly. But it's the same point what you were saying before, right? That we're not prisoners of our biology. We have these prefrontal cortex that we can make decisions. So you might have different motivations when you wake up in the morning. You might feel yourself pulled in one way or another because of your genes and your biology. But it turns out there's a lot of things you can do. If you're craving a lot of dopamine, you can engage in group sports. You can engage in physical activity. You can you can travel. You can engage in all sorts of sensation-seeking behaviors. And for me, the issue with infidelity, it's not the desire to have multiple partners. It's not necessarily a problem that can be navigated. It's the idea that people do it through betrayal. So they get extra partners without negotiating it, without talking about it. And that is almost always a problem to a relationship.
Yeah. And I mean, I usually define cheating as something that goes outside of the relationship agreement. That could be anything. Yeah. It could you could have the agreement and understanding that you don't spend time with people of a certain gender or whatever, or you can have the perspective that cheating is exclusively having sex with somebody else when you didn't talk about it or something. Yeah, it's a wide umbrella.
Yeah, and I love that you say that. One of my colleagues, I mentioned Amanda Gessman earlier, and also Dr. Rhonda Balzerini, we've been thinking about this. Like, how do you really understand infidelity in different relationship structures? Both, we've done a lot on motivations for infidelity and outcome, what impacts of infidelity in socially monogamous people and couples. But what about non-monogamous relationships? And I think there's, we know that there's often this false sense that people have, like, oh, if you're polyamorous or you're non-monogamous, there's no infidelity. Yeah, it's like, nope, there actually is. There's still rules and there's boundaries that are established in most cases, in almost most cases. And because in a non-monogamous relationship, people are often still negotiating these pair bonds, these love relationships. So there are some things that upset each other or partners or put each other's health at risk. And so how you negotiate all of that. So we're just starting to ask questions about that.
The funny thing is it's often more the emotional side from what I've seen in non-monogamous people. It's like, okay, sex isn't the biggest factor here. If you are, spending your quality time and your love and care and prioritizing somebody that, the other person feels jealous of or something like that, that generates a lot of feeling.
Yeah, exactly. And how we work through that. And is it something that you care about? I've often thought, we study infidelity a lot and we think about motivations. I've often thought about flipping it. And actually with my colleague Dylan Selterman, who we just published some infidelity papers, we're talking about, we might flip and ask people not so much, why do you commit infidelity, but why do you choose not to commit infidelity? It can be relatively easy. What stops you from doing it? And I think a lot of it are things like that. Like, I don't want to hurt my partner. I don't want to, damage what I've got.
I think that's really smart. I want to encourage you to like pursue that, because in therapy, one of the most powerful questions when I'm dealing with, say, suicide is, why haven't you done this?
Oh, interesting.
Right. Why haven't you done, looking for the spaces in between, because that's where you get good information. It's like, well, I would never do that to my brother, or, I don't actually ever want that to happen, but I can't stop thinking about it, whatever it is, in that, why haven't you get a lot of information.
That's really interesting. All right, I'm going to do the study now. You pushed me. I love it.
I'll take a shot out. It's fine.
You got it.
You wanted to talk a little bit about breakups, I think. You had mentioned that's something that's interesting to you. What's interesting about that to you? Why is that a topic that's kind of on your mind?
Yeah, and I'm curious, you'll probably have so many additional thoughts on it, because you see the pain that people experience when they go through breakups and relationship dissolution.
And I've experienced it.
Yeah, right. And so many of us have. And I'm actually interested in, I think we're seeing a younger generation. Part of what we're seeing is as people are taking longer to get in relationships, we're also seeing some evidence that young people are kind of experiencing more feelings of love than perhaps past generations, because they have more relationship experiences. And so I'm also curious the degree to which, like, are young people having more heartbreak than their parents or grandparents had. We don't know quite yet, but I'm interested in what happens when relationships end. So a lot of my work is actually on ramps and off ramps of relationship, all the dating and courtship process that we get into it. And then as we move out of them, and the space in the middle, psychologists do a lot of stuff on relationship maintenance and that's really interesting. And I read that work, but I'm less interested by my own research on that part. And for the breakup piece, how when we choose to break up, but also all the factors, a lot of them, I think, as an evolutionist, that shape what we experience. So 50% in one of our studies, 50% of people have had a yo-yo relationship, an on again, off again relationship. And I think part of that process is also understanding is when you are bonded to someone, particularly if you love someone. And if I think of love as, I know sometimes people will say that love is like a noun, is what you do. Love is a verb. I mean, what do you do for someone?
Sure.
And I think there's truth to that. But I also think love is a noun, it's a state of being. It's a neuropsychological state of being. It's what's going on in your brain. You experience love for someone, and you can love someone who treats you terribly. So the challenge with the saying, well, love is, if do you really love each other if you're in an abusive relationship? And I think that there's a sort of philosophical therapeutic question there about, maybe this isn't a healthy relationship. From my vantage point as a biologist, I could say, well, the parts of the brain that are involved with love, yes, you could be deeply bonded to someone that you treat them badly or they treat you badly.
Sure.
And for me, when I think of breakups, it's that when we sever those relationships, even if we're the one doing the breakup, can be really hard to end a pair bond relationship because of all the neurochemistry that's involved, because of the deep physiology of attachment and bonding. In fact, my colleague Helen Fisher and others put people who had been romantically rejected into an fMRI brain scanner. And when you look at their brains, first you actually see pain regions going off, which also tells us when people say they're in pain when they go through a breakup, they actually are in physical pain.
Sure, heartbreak. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's a great expression. You feel pain. But there were also parts of the brain that look remarkably like someone going through cocaine withdrawal. And that helps us understand that these deep bonds, especially the role of dopamine in romantic love, it feels like an addiction at times. And as you tear that away, even if you're the one saying, I got to get out of this relationship, I don't trust you anymore, it's not healthy, or you got dumped, or kind of regardless of how you get there, that relationships can be painful. And in fact, we have some evidence that they're harder on men than they are on women, even though we often think women are more romantic.
Absolutely not. Yeah, we are very sensitive.
Exactly, right? You and I are here defending this.
Yes.
And it's in the data. Men take longer to get over breakups. They're actually much more likely to commit suicide 100%. After a breakup as well.
Or murder.
Or murder. Yeah, exactly. They react more intensely and problematically. And so I'm getting more and more interested in this, in our own studies and other studies on relationship dissolution and breakups. And my takeaway from that, I think what people can do in our lives for it is, I think we have to be a lot more empathetic with ourselves and others when we go through breakups and heartache. To understand this is a whole mind-body reaction, and it's okay to grieve, and it's okay for those around us to grieve. I think often people are quick to tell friends and loved ones like, "Oh, it's time to get back on the horse. Let's go back out and find you someone," and it's time to stop talking about them. The relationship's over. That's probably not really great advice when we start to look at what's going on biologically when you end a bond that Mother Nature, evolved for to be intense, to weather storms with someone. And when a storm finally comes that splits it up, that could be really challenging. And I've actually come to believe that if you've ever loved someone, they kind of stay with you forever.
Sure.
A part of them, and how we continue to negotiate that is I think we just need more empathy on that side of relationships.
Yeah. Loving a person, I would say, if there's a musical artist you loved at some point, they're always with you. Like, say you loved a musical artist. This is the case for many people with me. And then you realize they've done some really problematic things. You don't listen to them anymore. It doesn't mean they're not still in there.
Yeah. You hear it in the radio, you hear it in a car or something. You're like, oh yeah, I remember that.
It's like, why'd you have to fucking do that?
Yeah.
So do you want to hear a little bit of kind of personal information for the breakups? Yeah. So, I've had a few notable breakups in years past. as an adult and as a non-monogamous adult, right? And there's two notable ones that I can remember handling in very different ways, right? One, I was, the stereotypical, just a fucking mess. Like I was walking around like a ghost. It was really, really ugly and bad. And like, I did not handle it well. And it took a while to sort of come back to reality. I have a series of pictures on my phone of selfies where you see me kind of come back to life over the following months, The other one, what I learned from that is that that's what happens to me, when I love somebody and then that's gone and I have to sort of figure out how to navigate reality without that. And so the second one that I'm thinking of, I was like, okay, like I need to like go into like recovery protocol. I was journaling twice a day, find it like basically I just like powered through the grief of it. And I was like, I'm going to write until there is nothing left for me to possibly write about this. And it still sucked, but it was such a vastly different experience to acknowledging that like, okay, this is a grieving process I'm going to go through. So let's facilitate that.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for sharing that. And I think it's so helpful for people to hear. And personally, I had, when I had a family member pass away, that's how I handled my grief. I think I published more in that 12 months afterwards than I did my whole career. I just poured myself. I would be up all night just writing. And that was how I sort of worked through that. And I think when we think of grief and bereavement, that we have these different ways that we process and manage it. I mean, therapists have long known this, right, that we have it, but I think just when I say we, I mean like all of us can just be too flippant when it comes to relationships about the real grief that's involved when they end. So that's in the book, in the Intimate Animal, I have a whole chapter that I really deal with breakups and their sort of biology and psychology and the cultural factors, because I think they really are so impactful in ways that we don't always think through. The other part, we've done a study in my lab, we haven't published yet, that what's interesting to me is that I really like what you were saying, because it's also a reminder that we can go through breakups. And one thing we see that was interesting in the data is that people don't always react the same way. So one breakup, they gain 10 pounds. Another breakup, they lose 10 pounds. One breakup, they binge drink alcohol and drugs. And another one, they go to the gym 2 times a day for 3 months. And that often it's a stress response, but we don't always have a consistent response. And I think that's an important reminder of each relationship is dynamic, and the way that we show up, or in the way that we experience it, the way that we pull away from it or get pulled away from it, that it's different. And that has to do a lot about the unique dynamic aspects of each relationship, which is also why I think one of the things, the takeaways for me of when you understand the science of love and sex and the biology, that there isn't a perfect formula. Like people always say like, well, what's the perfect algorithm to find the perfect match? I go, there isn't one. There's too much dynamic that happens. There's timeliness. There's a particular moment in time when you meet someone, there's what's going on in your lives. There's your personalities. That's how they interact in a unique way. I guess the positive takeaway from that is also don't try to rinse and repeat in your relationships, because each one will be unique. Absolutely. They're always dynamic.
So before we kind of start to wrap up, I'm curious, in your position as being, associated with the Kinsey Institute as well as Match Group, like what, do you have any advice for people who are dating right now? People who are on the apps or trying to date off the apps? Like any practical advice based on just the wealth of knowledge that you're kind of always consuming?
Yeah, I love it. You remind me to be practical and like, how do we actually use this in our lives? Which I need you to. Thank you. And I do actually. I think that one of the challenges for singles today in all of these studies we've done and looking at dating, there are a few challenges. One is that we have a mismatch between our evolved selves and the current technological environment. And part of that mismatch is there's so much information and data that it's hard for the human brain to process it in a way that we want it to. And what happens on dating apps and websites in particular, I mean, on the one hand, I'm an optimist about them. I think that there's an extraordinary amount of opportunity that people of I mean, when else before could you go on an app? You can go on an app if you have a particular, if you're looking for someone to play tennis with, if you're looking for someone with a particular kink, if you're looking for someone in open relationships, if you're looking for someone in the same religion,
Tinder.
Same food
That's how I found my girlfriend.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, it's an extraordinary opportunity. And in fact, in our studies of different sexual orientations, gay men and lesbian women in particular find online dating a lot safer.
Right.
We can forget that in many places of the world, you can't just walk into a bar if you're LGBTQ to meet someone. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there, but we also know that it's different from what our ancestors experienced and the evolved mechanisms of hearing someone's voice, seeing their body language, knowing their social network, smelling them, maybe tasting them, right? We invoke the bodily senses. So I think first challenge is remember, these are introducing sites. You want to then meet the person and let the human brain does what the human brain does. Mm-hmm. But before you can meet them, you've got this search problem, really.
Yeah.
And sometimes psychologists call this the paradox of choice. There's other kind of cognitive mechanisms at play as well. But that our challenge is there's so many options that we discount people so quickly because we keep thinking that you meet someone and you say, well, you're great, but you're 6 foot. And I really wanted someone who was 6'1" because I like to wear a 4-inch heel. Or you're great, but you have blonde hair. And I really imagined a brunette woman in my fantasy, right? And that we can get hyper focused on small things, which we only do because we have this perception in our brain that, yeah, you're great, but there's another 3,000 people I could swipe on before bedtime. So surely I'll find someone who doesn't have that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the big mistake. That's where we need to kind of take control with our prefrontal cortex and say, I'm being ridiculous. Let me. So I actually think that for many people, their standards are set a little too high. And I think that we hear all the time about having high standards. That's fine, but not if you're not happy. And what I see is that people have standards so high and then they're upset that they can't find partners or people to connect with. And that is a condition of thinking we have an unlimited resource, that we have an unlimited pool of partners. And if I just keep looking in that pool, I'm going to find someone perfect who meets all of my criteria. And what we lose out on that is going on dates of someone who's got, 2/3 of your criteria and explore what it is that you like about them. We found in one of our studies, over 1/3 of people fell in love with someone they weren't initially attracted to.
Yeah.
And over 70% were attracted to someone that they didn't initially think that they were. So that takes time. That takes getting to know someone. That takes learning their personality, if you trust them. So my advice is, if you're on these apps or websites, or if you're using a matchmaker, or if you're going to a bar, statistically in the US, most first dates are happening through apps and websites. Get to know people. Try to focus on the person in front of you, and don't try to get out of your head of saying, well, in my pocket is my phone and there's a couple hundred more people I could find. Really try to get to know someone. And that's where the fun of dating and courtship is, of getting to learn someone new and have them take you along for new experiences and expansion of the self and new worldviews, and really try to focus on the people in front of us and not be distracted by the fantasy that there's more just a click away. I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And then I have one other practical tip that I'll give people if you're on an app or website, or if you're just on a date. And one thing I see all the time is this challenge. People forget sometimes that dating is dyadic and courtship is dyadic. And what I mean by that is, just as you're out there searching for someone, other people are searching for you. And I've had so many friends open up their app and show me, like, look, what do you think of this? And I'm like, you have one picture, or you haven't filled out the prompts. And they're like, well, I'm not that serious about it. And I think that's not the point. No one's going to click on you. Like, you're searching, but no one's searching. No one's going to look at your profile. And we have to remember, it's always a two-way street. So you have to put enough out there that someone can see your picture and say, oh gosh, is that, were you hiking in Central America? I've always wanted to do that too. Or is that, were you skiing in the Alps? I did that 3 years ago. And you have to have something that someone can connect with you on. You have to have enough in your pictures and your profile that, just like you're searching for your match, people who are searching for you, that you would register as an option of someone they can connect with. And that means being curious, but also allowing other people to be curious about you, giving them opportunities to be curious about you. I think that's from your
research earlier that you mentioned, we know that effort matters a lot, right? And so if you're not demonstrating any effort before even, matching with somebody or meeting with them, then you're kind of setting yourself up for failure.
Exactly. That effort, that intentionality, and that curiosity. Curiosity is a powerful, powerful tonic for relationships.
Yeah, agreed. You got into a relationship and got married relatively recently, right?
I did, yeah. And we have a newborn, which I didn't write about in the book.
We can hear maybe a little bit of newborn chatter in the backgrout, which is great. I love it. No, it's fine. We're real people.
Where I'm at home, he's upstairs. Like, occasionally, I'm muting the mic, but it's he's actually laughing his head off, which makes me keep smiling. So yeah, as I started this book and I started writing this book. We had this big singles data set. I actually had been recently broken up when I was starting the book. And then I met my wife, Michelle, as I was writing it. And that changed some of the stories I had and changed my interpretation of how and I think things that I wrote about in the book. And we met on an app like so many Americans do.
Which app?
And it's been great. We met on a different app, not one of Match's apps.
Okay. So you can't really say that.
I can. Yeah, we actually met on Bumble. But
okay, right on.
Yeah. And it was great. But partly it's also, I think that the apps that you use them for depending on your age demographic, your location. So the other is most people are on 3 apps at a time. So, and which one you kind of connect with can be kind of a roll of the die. And what we see is that people are often on multiple apps and they actually vary their profiles, the particular pictures and prompts that they put. And that's a good thing. I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. Well, that's really awesome. Congratulations on, the family and congratulations on the book. When is it formally released?
Thank you so much. The official publication in the US is January 27th. And in the UK, it's February 12th, I believe. So the intimate animal's coming.
Do you have anywhere in particular that you would prefer for people to pick it up from?
Oh no, I think I'm lots of different options of there's also an ebook and audiobook available, and
I just want to get it out. Or did somebody else do the audiobook?
Someone else did it. They had an actor do it. My New York accent probably comes out too often.
No, I think it would be great, but always good to have a professional.
Yeah, but I'm excited to share it with folks. So and we'll be doing some events around the country. So folks, you can follow either me on social media or Dr. Justin Garcia or the Kinsey Institute will be posting about events, about our research and about the book. And I just invite people to join us and be in conversation. I meant it when I said it. I'm honored when people share stories with us and how the science can relate to their personal lives.
Yeah. And you said this is just at Dr. Justin Garcia?
Yeah.
DR. I'll put links in the description.
Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time speaking with me. This is fascinating stuff. And hopefully this gives people something to think about when they're, out there navigating their options and their intimate life.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been such an honor. I'm really grateful.